Today we have to talk about the Second Amendment and banking. That's right, financial institutions. You need to understand the essence of something that's going on right now in the world of Donald Trump and his attempt to take out the deep state. In particular, efforts by the deep state to use banking regulations to take out America's gun industry and the Second Amendment. We're going to get a little geeky, but I will make you the smartest person in the room about banking and how they hope to destroy the Second Amendment and why they're going to fail when we get right back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, and author of the new law review article in the Georgetown Journal of Law and Public Policy entitled Dangerous but Not Unusual, Mistakes Commonly Made by Courts in the Second Amendment Context in the Post-Bruin World, all the different ways to argue in favor of the Second Amendment and how the Supreme Court should decide all the various issues. It's about 65 pages long. Definitely going to be used in court going forward. I'm sure a lot of advocates, historians, and scholars will be reading this article and talking about it. So make sure you get a free copy. It's totally fine. You can just download it and send it to your friends from the Georgetown School of Law. I'll link in the description here down below. And also, I'm thrilled to report that starting Monday, you'll be able to vote for the Four Boxes Diner and Mark Smith for the 2025 Gunnies Award. I've been nominated again for the top voices of the Second Amendment. And this year, I feel like we might break through and maybe we'll win. We keep getting nominated and we keep losing, but maybe this year things will be different. All right, folks, so we have to talk about this. This is a hot topic on X and in the papers, and that is this. It's the notion of debanking, which is really just a word that says banks in America, credit card companies in America, come up with an excuse to take people who have politically unpopular opinions or who are in businesses that the bankers don't like and kick you out of the bank, deny you the ability to bank, which means if you can't bank, you have nowhere to keep your money, you have nowhere to get a credit card, you can't buy stuff with a credit card, and basically you're ostracized and kicked out of the American economy. Now, this notion has been popularized by, believe it or not, communist China. In communist China, they have what's known as a social credit scoring system, which if the government thinks you're a good boy, they pat you on the head and they give you all sorts of freedoms like banking, credit cards, the ability to maneuver, the ability to leave the country. If you're a bad boy and you have bad thoughts as defined by the Chinese Communist Party, you're denied those things. They debank you. They take away the ability to use credit cards. They take away your ability to move around the country. They basically make it very difficult for you to live in China if you have bad ideas. You don't toe the Communist Party line. Well, this concept is something that's quite appealing to American liberals who are not liberal at all. They're really authoritarian in my view. And basically what's been going on, and this started in the Obama years, the government realized that they had the authority to torture, if you will, make life difficult on private banks. Now, private banks were very important because not only is this where you get money for your mortgages, where you get money for your business loans, where you write checks to pay your grocery bills or your credit card bills, it also gives you access to credit cards where you can charge things on Amazon or online. As you go shopping for Christmas on the internet, let's say. You need to rent a car. You need to buy airline tickets. You need to rent a hotel, and so on and so on. You need credit cards. Okay, so what the Obama people figured out, learning presumably from the Chinese, that if you could get control of the banking system, the financial system, and begin to use the banking system as a way to punish groups of people you do not like. For example, gun companies, same-day lending companies, or payday lending companies, the cannabis industry potentially, the pornography industry, the cryptocurrency industry, whatever it is, any industry that the government's deep state did not like, they wanted to find a way to make that industry harder to succeed, harder to make money, harder to grow, harder to stay alive. So they did various things, including something known as Operation Choke Point, which we don't have to get into the details here. But basically the idea was to try to cut off money flows, banking flows, credit card flows, and the like to these industries that the Obama administration didn't like, that the regulators did not like. Now, this kind of went away to some degree during the Trump era, during those 4 years, but of course Biden was trying to bring it back. He would have brought it back big time if he was reelected through Kamala Harris. Now, this has just come up again, and I'm going to tell you what it just came up, what's going on, and how to fix it. This just came up again because of two things. One is an extremely famous Silicon Valley investor by the name of Mark Andreessen. Super rich, super successful, super smart, very well respected. I can tell you from my practice on Wall Street as a New York litigator, a national litigator really, very good guy, very famous guy, very credible guy. And he's come around and become kind of pro-Trump. And he explained finally in a podcast this week why this occurred. And he explained that his meetings with the Biden administration scared him because he realized that what they were talking about was taking over the American economy and rewarding people that the Biden administration really liked and doing things that they liked, and punishing people or making it hard for those people to do business if the Biden administration didn't like them. And this scared Mark Andreessen basically into supporting Donald Trump and being friendly with Elon Musk and on and on and on. And I'll put a link to an interview he did where he discusses this in great detail. He also talks about this specifically with respect to the cryptocurrency industry, where they're trying to get crypto, which is really an alternative to the US dollar, and it's outside of the banking system. And by the way, that is a major reason why the deep state, liberal banking system regulators do not like any kind of cryptocurrency, because it is outside of the financial system. It allows you to have assets outside of the system and fly around the world and bring your assets with you, essentially by logging into a computer and downloading your crypto or using crypto to exchange it into the local currency. It really takes away a lot of power that the government has over you if you have cryptocurrencies. Again, this purpose of this video is not about cryptocurrencies. It's just an example of a disfavored industry that the deep state doesn't like. Now, the other thing, in addition to this important interview that has been viewed 10 million times by Mark Andreessen about why he was so scared of Biden getting reelected through Kamala Harris, the other thing that broke is Melania Trump wrote a book where she discusses how shocked she was to find out that her longtime bank had kicked her out and would no longer do banking with her, provide her banking services, and also did the exact same thing to her teenage son, Barron Trump. So she basically said that both Melania Trump, and Barron Trump were kicked out of long-standing banks that they'd had for many, many, many years because basically they were Trumps, right? And she was shocked by this. So those two stories are making the way, and I want to talk about what this means, because the Operation Choke Point that started under Obama was about targeting, among other things, the gun industry. They wanted to kill the gun industry, and if you couldn't do it through legislation, you couldn't pass a law to kill the gun industry, they wanted to find alternative ways. And I write about this in First They Came for the Gun Owners. They talk about how you use basically banking regulations to make it difficult for gun companies to engage in basic financial transactions like every other business. Like you prevent them from having credit card access, for example. So people can't use credit card charges in their FFL retail establishments, for example. So again, what do you need to know about this? What you need to know about this is that there's a couple things that the deep state banking regulators have wanted to do. One is they wanted to shrink the number of banks in America. And two is they wanted to use regulations as an excuse to accomplish public policy goals that they cannot otherwise accomplish through legislation. Now, the first way to expand tremendous control over the banking system was to shrink the number of banks and financial institutions in the United States. Keep in mind, for example, in Canada, there's only about 4 or 5 banks in the country. That makes it very easy for government regulators to regulate banks and to make the banks do what you want if you're a government regulator, because there's only 4 or 5 of them. You only have to have 4 or 5 meetings to persuade every bank in Canada, for example, to not fund the gun industry, or to not fund the porn industry, or to not fund the cryptocurrency industry, or to not fund the cannabis industry, or to not fund, the Republican version in Canada, or the Trump in Canada, whatever it is. You only need to do that with 4 or 5 banks, and you basically have debanked people you don't like in the country of Canada. Here in the United States, there's still thousands of financial institutions, but there's a lot fewer today than there used to be, in part because one of the strategies has been by the anti-gun, anti-American deep state, in my view, is they've imposed massive amounts of compliance costs and regulation costs on banks. The consequence of this is that smaller banks can no longer afford the compliance costs that they have to satisfy to keep running by satisfying these federal bank regulators. So the result of this is you have 5 or 6 local banks that have been operating independently for many years, but because the compliance cost, meaning how much they have to pay on lawyers, accountants, actuaries, compliance people, whatever it is so high that those 4 or 5 local banks that you may have banked with when you were young, they have to merge together because the compliance costs have to be shared among those 4 or 5 banks. So I see this in community after community. You go from 5 or 6 banks in the area, and they all merge together over time, and then you have 1 or 2 banks. And then they merge into bigger banks. So you have a small local bank, when I was a kid, gets merged and merged and merged, and you wake up one day, and now they're part of JP Morgan Chase, or Goldman Sachs, or any of these other massive worldwide banks, HSBC, whatever. The reason why this trend is occurring in part is because the government regulators want this to occur. Because again, like the Canada model, the fewer the banks we have in the United States, the better it is for government because it's a lot easier for them to control the banking system if they only have to monitor a handful of banks. And the better, and the worse it is, I should say, the worse it is for you and me because it gives us fewer and fewer banking options. And if there's only a handful of banks that we're allowed to do business with, and then those banks are beholden to the anti-Trump, anti-American, anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment banking regulators, let's say, we have a problem. We have no options. You see what I'm saying? And that's what the anti-gunners and the deep state people know. And that's what they've been doing. They're trying to shrink the number of banks in America on purpose to make it harder for us to find options, harder for the gun industry to find options, harder for the cryptocurrency industry to find options, and easier for banking regulators to lord over us. On a related note, they've also expanded, this is very important to understand, they've expanded the notion of reputational risk. Now, what do I mean by this? When a bank has to undergo compliance review by regulators, I mean, a regulator will come in and examine the bank's books to see if they're liquid, if they're safe, if they're run correctly, and they're lawful and all that. They look for a series of what are known as risks. Some of the basic risks you're familiar with banking. For example, there could be interest rate risk. Are they paying out 7% to depositors, but they're only loaning money at 2%? Well, that could be what's known as an interest rate risk or an interest risk, right? They're paying out more money than they're bringing in because of an imbalance of interest rates. That's an example. There could be what are known as credit risk, meaning they've loaned a bunch of money to an industry or to people that are deadbeats or can't pay it back. Well, that's a credit risk to a bank. If the people aren't paying back the loans that they've made, that's a credit risk. So you got interest rate risk, you've got credit risk, you have certain types of pricing risks associated with credit cards, kind of related to all of the above. But then you have something known, and this is very important to understand, reputational risk. Hear what I just said? Reputational risks. Now, what is that exactly? Well, it's a very squishy subjective concept, and it's exactly the kind of squishy subjective content that the anti-gun bank regulators like, the anti-Trump regulators like, the anti-American regulators like, if they're trying to bring about a communist Chinese-style credit score to America. Because reputational risk is fuzzy. And what it really is saying to the bank is you should not be engaged in business with any person or anybody or any group of people or any industry or any company where your reputation as a bank could be hurt by virtue of the fact that you're providing banking services, credit card services, financial services, loans to someone that is a reputational bad risk. Now, here's the danger. What is a reputational risk is not objective. It's very subjective and warm and fuzzy. And that's why they like it. Because the bank regulators can come in and say, geez, doing business with Donald Trump Little sketchy. He's a Trump. He's an authoritarian. People think he's a fascist. He's the next coming of Hitler. Maybe you shouldn't do business with Donald Trump or his family. And then the bank's like, geez, bank regulator, now that you say it, maybe you're right. Maybe I should debank the Trumps. Or, again, you see how it works? The banking regulator from D.C. or New York City, liberal bastions, go into a bank and they say to the bank, geez, we're the regulator from New York. We're the regulators from D.C. We have the power as the government to impose fines on you, to sanction you. We can even shut you down, bank. So, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. The gun industry is a kind of icky industry, right? Cryptocurrency, ooh, there's money launderers. People who are criminals might use that. Maybe, right? Or maybe there's a mass shooting with a gun. Ooh, watch out, this terrible stuff happens. And you are banking or providing banking services to a crypto company or to a gun company or any of these things. And that may give rise to a reputational risk because you're doing banking with them. Now, of course, step back for a moment and think about this from a common sense point of view. No one says to a restaurant, you served a bowl of pasta to a member of the mafia and therefore you're a problem, or you serve food to a gun industry executive, or you serve food to someone in the crypto space, or you serve food to someone in the payday lending business or anything, or you provided, catering services to a Republican club in the local area. No one punishes these people for that. But again, when it comes to banking, because of this interrelationship between the banking regulators who are government officials and banking compliance people who are scared to death that the government officials will shut them down or fine them or penalize them or do something bad to the bank, because of this imbalance, when the government regulators say, geez, we don't like Trump, we don't like Republicans, we don't like the gun company, we don't like the cannabis industry, we don't like libertarians, we don't like the cryptocurrency industry, we don't like payday lending. Whatever it is they happen not to like on that day, they say to the bank, and the bank realizes they've just been given a hint by the regulator with the power to shut them off and shut their bank and screw their bank up. So what is the bank going to do? They're going to be like, oh yeah, okay, maybe that's a good idea. And again, the excuse they use is reputational risk, meaning it's a risk to the reputation of the bank. But whose perspective is that? To me, for example, if you are the main bank to Donald Trump, the MAGA movement, to conservatives, to gun industry, to the crypto movement, from my point of view, I view that as a positive. Your reputation, to me, is enhanced. But if you're a nutty liberal from one of the coasts, your reputation as a bank is probably not enhanced. You see what I'm saying? So the perspective of what is a reputational risk and what helps your reputation or doesn't help your reputation is very subjective and warm and fuzzy. And it allows these deep state regulators to cause banks to debank Melania Trump, Barron Trump, conservatives, right-wingers, libertarians, gun industry, whatever. So to me, moving forward, the way to solve this, if I were advising the Donald Trump administration in the banking side, I would tell them to laser focus on narrowing the scope dramatically, if not eliminating, reputational risk as a basis for a bank to debank people. They can consider credit risk, whether or not the person will pay the money back. They consider interest rate risk, meaning that you don't want your interest rates to be bad where you're loaning out money at a lower rate than you're taking it in and paying. You get the point. You don't want that discrepancy. But reputational risk is ripe for abuse by those politically minded deep state banking regulators that can lord over the bank compliance officers, many of whom, by the way, are also in these urban areas and can basically cause debanking of people they don't like. And unfortunately, most of those people are still, as best I can tell, pro-deep state, pro-regulation, anti-MAGA type folks, anti-conservative, anti-gun people. Now, I may be wrong. It's just a sense I have. But when the banking industry is so tied up with these urban areas of San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, New York City, Washington, D.C., London, Paris, Bonn, Moscow. You get the point, right? These are big international financial institutions. And where do you think, as a general matter, their head's going to be politically? They're going to be liking conservatives, liking Republicans, liking Donald Trump, or maybe not so much. Are they going to like gun companies, or maybe not so much. I'll let you do the math. I think you know what the answer is. So there you have it, folks. I hope this wasn't too geeky to talk about banking, debanking, and the gun industry and more. But if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the description down below. And again, starting Monday, voting for the Gundys is going to start for top voice of the Second Amendment for 2025. Hopefully you'll support the Four Boxing Diner and Mark Smith. And of course, don't forget to like this video and share it. Make sure you subscribe. We're still trying to get to 200,000 subscribers. We're way behind everyone else, but we're working hard to catch up. Make sure you follow me on X at Four Boxing Diner, and we will see you again very, very soon, I hope, here at the Four Boxing Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.